Alright, hello again. How are you guys? Hope you're doing well. I am Reese McLaren, and I am going to be going through a little bit of the Tassie draft haul. It has just been recently mentioned and confirmed as to what Tasmania will be receiving for the 2027 draft and a few of the bonuses that they are getting to get their club up and running as the 19th official AFL licensee. So we're going to be seeing, obviously, a very compromised draft in 2027, but not as compromised as it looks at first. So I'll go through a few of the details to begin with, and we'll talk about some of the players and some of the, I guess, swirlings around what they could use for those trades. So we'll have to wait and see. But with this draft haul, before we get into it, I want to quickly mention that it'd be very much appreciated if you left a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and came back and commented down below what you think in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking about Tassie's draft haul as we get through all of this, and it'll be just great to see you in general respond and see what you're thinking. So, the 19th club, Tasmania Devils, will be receiving picks 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 in the 2027 draft, and the first selection of each following round. So there is a lot of draft picks to work with. However, the trick, and I guess the thing around this one, is that they must trade picks 5, 7, 11, and 13. Meaning that Tassie will be finishing with picks 1, 3, and 9. They can keep those ones. They can trade them if they'd like to, in case there's players that they're looking to grab. But they can trade them in order to up the amount of players they can get. But 5, 7, 11, and 13 are incredible draft hauls. Depending on how good the 2027 draft is looking, and when eventually we do get around to that one, because that is not this next draft, but the draft after. So we're very close to seeing Tassie in our draft situation, I guess. But we are seeing massive, it feels like, haul to start with. But they also have another $5 million sign-on bonus with the ability to sign one uncontracted player from each club. In the 2028 and 2029 drafts, Tasmania will also have picks 5 and 9 in the first selection of every round. But pick 5 from both years must be traded, so they will always have pick 9. So after their first initial big draft, they will really technically only have the one draft pick. However, the other one helps them again find ways to find more players to bring into their club, and this is for another 3 years. So they're getting some assistance for the first 3 years to get themselves up and going, and again, it can be rolled forward in 2028. So 2029, nothing can be rolled forward, just the 2028 picks. So with that being said, 3 years of assistance, it's fairly similar to what we've seen in terms of the Gold Coast expansion. It had been mentioned that the AFL was going to use the Gold Coast and GWS expansions to see just how, I guess, helpful they would be to Tasmania. But it is a fairly big amount. It does make sense that they are going to be seeing pick 1 and 3 at the very least. They'd like to have some young talent to get themselves started. It also means if there's two really, really good players that are from, say, Victoria, much like the Noah Anderson, Matt Rouse situation, they could use picks 1 and 3 to get them. So there's a helpful situation to hopefully keep those Tassie players around, because I think that's going to be one of the tough parts of Tassie, and we're going to see it fairly quickly, is that Tassie, look, I like Tassie. This is almost completely away from the AFL side of things, but Tassie itself is probably a tough place to convince people to stay. And look, Tassie people are so loving and wear Tassie on their sleeve, and it's credit to them. I think that's why, me as a North fan, I'm terrified of when Tassie come into the league and potentially take Colby McKercher away from me. But yeah, the idea that they have the ability to sign one uncontracted player from every single club as well is also a very, very interesting situation and scenario. It has been mentioned that teams that lose players from those uncontracted, I guess, I wouldn't say steals, but those situations where one of their uncontracted players are picked up from Tasmania, they will be receiving a floating compensation pick in the year of their choosing, so they can decide when they want their compensation to kick in, which is an interesting scenario. It means that teams and clubs will lose a player and either they'll need talent straight away, so they'll use that compensation immediately, or they will be absolutely fine. They'll be in a really good situation, and so as soon as they lose their, I guess, situation where they're at the top of the ladder, winning premierships potentially, they may hold on to that compensation pick and use that as an assistance pick. Imagine Tassie were to take a player from Brisbane, right? Brisbane now get that floating compensation pick just sitting around there. So as soon as they look like they need a young player to help themselves out, I'm not sure what this compensation pick will look like from the information that I've kind of brought together. The compensation pick that they mentioned, the floating one, doesn't mention a spot, a place in the draft that they will land, but I'm assuming it'll be like a late first, end of first, or start of second round pick. Not something that's ridiculously overpowered. Imagine you lose an uncontracted player and your result of that is, congratulations, you get pick one. Something about that doesn't feel right. So we'll see how it turns out, but the compensation pick that you can just float in the air, right? If Brisbane were to lose an uncontracted player on the fringes and have that pick just floating around, it's a really interesting scenario. Really interesting, because you could potentially involve that in trades as well. We could wait to see how that turns out. I like the idea. I really do. And at least it gives the teams who are losing those players, potentially really important players, the freedom to choose when they get that help back. So at least there's that. You get a bit of reward. The net in, net out situation and scenario that my good friend Bem, otherwise known as the Premiership Quarter, talks about a lot. That's the way they like to do the free agency stuff and the trade period stuff. In other key allowances, Tasmania will have extra list spots, including up to 48 players in years 2, 3, and 4. Before returning to 44 players by year 6, so they get more players to work around with. It may mean that they get to test more things out. I think with the $5 million sign-on bonus that they have too, it will allow them to add those extra players onto the list for years 2, 3, and 4. But I'd imagine by year 5, it goes down to 46, I'd presume, and then eventually to 44 with the rest of the league by year 6. So it will even out eventually. It's just to help get them up to standard. They're going to have a whole bunch of different players. Of course, even with 44, they have a lot to test, but with those 4 extras, it does give them even more to work around with. Find out their team for the future, potentially their premiership team, whatever it may look like, or their top of the table running team. They'll get to work that out with the extra players. And then with the 44 players back to year 6, hopefully by then they've sorted it out. I am very interested to see how that goes, because I like the idea that they're giving them the chance to really work out, all right, we don't want you to fall into this hole, much like Gold Coast did, where they just could not get themselves out, where, cool, you got Gary Ablett, but you've got nothing else. You have at least some young players who would show a lot of potential and obviously had a lot of talent. You think of the likes who are around by that point. You had Stephen May, you had Tom Lynch, so many of these players who are so big in the game now who weren't so big back then, that just didn't break out in that Gold Coast side. So hopefully Tassie will get the opportunity to try out as many players as they possibly can to work out just who their team looks like and get them out of that hole. Not straight away, but not in the hole for 15 years like Gold Coast did. The Devils will also be given a Tasmanian academy similar to the Northern Academy model, which is the one that is used, I think it's Gold Coast, I'm not 100% certain, but the Northern Academy is basically where they produce talent within the Northern Territory, I believe. Again, not too versed on it. It's something I'm trying to get myself learning involved with this channel, but I'll look more into the Northern Academy model and see what that Tassie Academy is going to look like, because from what it sounds like, Tassie is going to have its own academy where it builds up players from Tasmania, gives them the opportunity to really show out, and then gives them a pathway into the AFL, into probably certain teams in this situation, the Tassie Devils. They get themselves an opportunity to go straight into Tassie. So really, really nice that they get themselves a nice startup, and it's also with the ability to pre-list eligible players for their first 4 years. So with that academy pick, or those academy players, they're going to be able to pre-list them and get them before anyone else can really pick them out. So that is what the Tassie Devils, for the most part, and the most important parts of the Tassie Devil draft haul and starting years, that's what Tassie is going to be getting. Let me know what you think. I hope I explained it in a way that made sense. So their draft, I guess, capital, it's big in year 1, of course. They're going to be noticed in year 1, but not as much as they probably would have been in previous times. So Gold Coast, we know how many picks they got to start and how much they lathered the draft. They'll still be like that for Tassie in 2027. They're going to have at least 1, 3, and 9. You're going to see them at least. 5, 7, 11, and 13 must be traded. They could even be traded for more picks, I'd imagine. But 1, 3, and 9, you will see go to Tassie at the very least. And then you'll see a bunch of other players get moved around involved with Tassie. So they're going to be busy. They're going to be very, very busy. But I'm excited to see when Tassie eventually joins the league, just how they will work the draft and how they will work with their benefits. Obviously, it's still 2 years away, so we still got a lot of time before we get to see how this works out, but it's not a bad start. I think Tassie will get themselves off to a good start. I just hope it can find a healthy medium. I don't know if they do end up, and this is so far in the future that we're talking about, so it's super hypothetical, but if this team does end up being ridiculously good with what they've got, then it'll make you reimagine just how, I guess, helpful the draft haul will be. This is basically using the data from all previous expansions, but most importantly, the Gold Coast and GWS one, because Gold Coast, you could very much argue, failed heavily, considering how long it took for them to finally get here and the crazy amount of assistance they got post their expansion. And then GWS felt just about right. They got themselves to a grand final in 2019, which was 7 or 8 years after their expansion, which feels about right. It feels when they should have hit their contending window. So maybe we see something similar with Tassie, but there's always the idea that maybe they mess it up. It's all going to come down to how they use it, but they've been given a fair bit of help, and I think it's not too much help, but it's a nice little setup they've got going on. So Tassie, I'd be very excited for your club. Just work out your stadium, all right? Nonetheless, appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate all that. My name's Reece McLaren. Appreciate you all for watching. Cheers.